So this week we watched Single Story by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, and I really enjoyed this TED Talk. She discussed her personal experiences being somebody from Nigeria and her outlook about how narratives about her nation affect how the world views her people. And something that really stood out to me was something she said in her TED Talk, which was, stories can break a dignity of a people, but stories can also repair that broken dignity. I found that to be really powerful, and I was able to relate to it in a lot of ways. Although I'm not Nigerian, I do come from the Philippines, and the single story narrative that I feel like I've experienced coming from the Philippines. I lived in the Philippines for 4 years. I wasn't born there, but I did live there for my high school experience. And coming back to America after living there really opened my eyes to how I even viewed my own country before I moved there. Before the Philippines, I lived in Germany, and I had lived there from 5th grade to 9th grade. And so I was going to be moving to the Philippines from Europe. I viewed the Philippines in a way where I was looking down at it more than something to be proud of. It really opened my eyes up to how I viewed my own country, but also my own people. Moving back to America from the Philippines, I was asked questions that I kind of viewed as a joke before. I never thought them to be serious questions people would ask. But questions like, oh, like, did you live in a village? And the funny thing is, I did live in a village, but what we call a village in the Philippines is not what people would imagine to be the typical village. Where I lived, which comes from a place of privilege in the Philippines, is I lived in a village which is considered more of like a neighborhood. And my specific village was a gated neighborhood with a security guard and everything. I really enjoyed listening to her speak about her own personal experience. I really enjoyed listening to her speak about her experiences as a Nigerian woman, discussing her people with non-African people. And I was able to relate in many ways because I've been asked questions like, oh, do you guys have Wi-Fi there? Like, do you guys even have internet? Or like, do your houses have roofs? Like, that's so ridiculous. Like, it's very closed-minded. It's ridiculous. And so I laughed a lot when she talked about... I found it very funny when she was talking about how she was, I believe, in a lecture, and a student asked or commented on how it's sad about how Nigerian fathers are because of how she wrote it in her book, I believe, and how she said, oh, I read, or was it watched, American Psycho, and it's a shame that... Americans are like murderers. That was so funny to me because it really does show how people, unless they're confronted with their ignorance, they just move about life believing that's how all of those people are. When in reality, you're just reducing them to one single narrative. This one narrative of these people do not define the whole people. And so it's very ridiculous to think that way, especially being someone who is American, but I wasn't raised majority in America. It's funny hearing people from all over the world and what their perceptions of Americans are. As someone who's identified as American and who was initially raised in America for a few years of my childhood, I heavily identified with my Americanness. And so I felt like I had to defend some of the things that were said about Americans, when in reality, a lot of the stuff they were saying was true, but a lot of it is also closed-minded because not all Americans are like that. But yes, I really enjoyed this week's video of the TED Talk, and that quote she said about how single stories can destroy a people, but these same stories can also help repair, was really powerful to me, and it really stood out to me. It ties into why I'm a filmmaker and why I want to create stories about people that represent my identities and how we're not a monolith. Like, no people are a monolith, and we all have different layers to us, and we all have different backgrounds which create different experiences, right? And so I found it really interesting, and I really enjoyed this week's TED Talk.